And
Well, that's the more reason you should tell me. Your observation is very fine.
and so I would have to agree with Heidegger's position that yes, the enframing technology as an enframing does have the potential to impact us in huge ways. At the same time, I think that it bears keeping in mind McLuhan's notion of remediation, that what actually new technology does is remediate old technology. So much of what we have historically gained in terms of our communicative and thinking processes gets preserved in the new media.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process of creating new media, I think what we end up with is something like what Leibniz imagined is the potential for other ways of thinking, other ways of doing things, because these other processes have been mechanized to the extent that we no longer need to concern ourselves with them so much. And so I would agree with the statement Toffler makes, but I would want to add more to it and say, yes, that's definitely an important aspect of technological advancement. At the same time, we still preserve much of what we do and always have done culturally and socially. And as an example, a case study that I use in my book, Global Technography, I look at how we actually use the cell phone to replace the wallet photo. So traditionally, before the advent of cell phones, we might carry around wallet photos, show each other pictures from our wallets, and we would build community in this way. Well, we still perform much the same in the present context, but now, of course, we're used to seeing pictures on each other's phones instead of from the wallet. And so that's an example of how we remediate and at the same time preserve our cultural performativity.
But won't you say, Professor Kane, that in that notion of remediation, one leaves out then two things. One is emergence of new functions and new conceptions of relationship. And secondly is new possibilities. Alvin Toffler, for instance, says one final major systemic outcome of this is creation of an intelligence environment. That ultimately we create an intelligence environment which in turn begins to change not only our thinking pattern but the very structure of human brain. The brain itself goes through physical transformation. So it's a very complex situation where we create an intelligent environment which begins to change the way we think, act, and relate. And then at the end, the final product of that is the whole sort of framework of our mind. And the brain structure itself is altered. How do we account for that fact?
Well, I'm not a biologist and nor a psychiatrist, but I'd want to be presented with some pretty strong evidence, very conclusive evidence that technology has the ability to change the way my brain is wired. I think that
a number of studies being done. Charlie Rose had one of the Indian American, some gentleman from India who's now here in the United States, who was heading a study, I think at UCLA or UC Davis, one of the two. And he has shown, not conclusive, I think is a different word, and it did vary from person to person, but gave a lot of interesting examples of how his project is looking at human brain and what he calls mirror cells, through which I recognize certain things about you and you recognize certain. And they're looking at different parts of the brain and how brain itself is going through changes, and now how through medical intervention we can make those changes more directed. So there are these elements. So we are in a very complex process. Not only our bodies are being changed, our minds are being, our thought patterns are being changed, our culture is being changed, and then I don't want to again ignore the fact that you made. So I'm asking you is the more complex question again. On one hand, we have a major transformative force unleashed around us. On the other hand, we have become so conscious of our own power in this context. So there's double mediation going on in the sense. We are self-conscious, we are Shakespeare's characters who read Shakespeare, and we are back on the stage again, having read him already, that kind of consciousness. What's the impact of that double consciousness in this regard?
the impact of double, can I just ask you to restate the...
Yeah, double consciousness, I mean, is one is consciousness in the moment I'm acting on like interviewing you right now. Second is my consciousness as a person who knows the role of technology, its power on me, and my ability to use it for different purposes. And all kinds of a matrix of choices that is presented to me, which was never known even to the emperor of a whole empire. Previously didn't have these choices that I have today. It's a totally new vista. So I'm saying, therefore, double consciousness, one of immediacy, second, enhanced consciousness of technology and opportunities opens up. How do we deal with that?
Well, that's an interesting question. I tend to avoid that type of double think about technology in my work, and you know, my specialty is in how we actually use technology in everyday life. Philosophically, I don't know if we actually walk around in a cognizant state of having two different mindsets. So maybe I'm not equipped to answer that question in depth.
We'll come back to that later on when we talk about Twitter and the article in the Time magazine. But let's go on to talk about other aspects of technology. Let's talk about technology and education. And we talk about technology and news then, how it's shaping the shape of news. Since both of you are academics, and I happen to have the pleasure of being one of your colleagues, how do you look at the notion of education being impacted by the new technology? And here we can talk more precisely of downside and upsides.
Okay. First of all, Dr. Saeed, I just want to say I'm always impressed by your knowledge of, you know, even when we talk in our office on campus, and so it's a real honor to be here with you today and with your listeners. Technology and education, I think, as far as an upside, it's opening the door for education for many people who might not have access otherwise. People who may not be located close to a university, for example, has the opportunity to learn. I think as educators, as we do classes online, or if we do classes that are hybrid classes, a combination of in-person and online, that it's very important to create the interpersonal relationships as much as possible, to allow a forum for people to build community, so that they can develop their skills as critical thinkers and have discussions. And so it isn't a good idea just to have, let's say, a lecture that you post online and people watch, and that's it, and nobody gets to know each other. So it needs to have the interaction built in. I say preferably that people get together in person and, you know, build the relationship that way first before moving online. But if not, at least having space online to build community and have discussions back and forth, so that we don't lose that aspect.
Tell us a little more about building this community, because it looks like this new technologies have altered the framework and shape of the type of communities we built previously.
Well, it's true. Literacy is such an important part of so many of the new technologies. You need to know how to read and write. And that excludes some people and, you know, includes people who have that ability. And so that's something that I think we need to be careful of as well. But in the educational setting where people do know how to read and write, I think, well, one thing that it does is when you post online on a discussion board, it allows the student to answer a question by going to the bookshelf and pulling out the textbook and maybe quoting, kind of like having a classroom paper that you turn in, maybe quoting a scholar and saying what they think about that and responding in much more detail than, let's say, sitting in a classroom where the professor asks a question and maybe I raise my hand and give a short answer with little thought, or maybe I just sit in the back that day and don't participate in the class. And so in the online community and classroom discussion setting, to participate in the class, you can't just be an observer because nobody will know you're there. So it requires the student to interact with the medium and actually post and have a discussion. And they also have the opportunity to have an in-depth discussion by taking an hour to put together their answer if they want, using their textbook and using their knowledge, and having this great answer to the professor's question for other students to comment on. So in that case, especially like in graduate studies, it can be a benefit when students are required to post, and then those posts are there for later access. Whereas in a classroom discussion, even though that has other benefits that online doesn't have,